Death Consciousness by Have a Nice Life is one of the best albums of all time. I'm not hearing any ifs, ands, or buts about it. We are simply going to allow that statement to exist, agree with it, and continue forward with that understanding. It's also one of the most depressing albums of all time, and upon first listen, I was both in awe and also in quiet fear of it, because it confronted me with a lot of ideas that I hadn't really considered up until listening to it. The chief among those is what I think about death. And I think death is something that a lot of us don't think about ever, if at all. But since listening to it, I think about it a lot more because I think it's something that most people should think about. Upon first listen, the song I Don't Love made me cry almost immediately. The opening verse confused me, but then the wall of sound hit and my brain turned off. And I realized that I was reacting emotionally rather than logically to it. My brain simply couldn't process hard enough to make up for that lack of rational thought, and so it just outpoured emotion. I don't know why that happened, but it changed how I thought about myself because I didn't think that I had a limit, but the limit was so easily smashed that I had to reevaluate how I thought of myself. Now, that sounds really dramatic, and I was really high when that happened, but I think it's important to talk about when I talk about the album because it's a fascinating experience to undergo because it's your body actively saying, I don't know what to do with this information. And then it's just like, okay, well then just default to whatever you think is correct here. And I don't know if that was the correct response to have, because I didn't do anything. I mean, literally, I heard the song, and then I just sat there while it played, and I didn't move until it was done. And I don't know if that's dramatic of me or not, but the invoking of that kind of emotional response is something I think death does in a lot of people. And I didn't realize it at the time, but upon coming back to it and starting this review, I realized that that was what I was thinking about. I wasn't thinking about the breakup I had just gone through or the fact that I felt very alone during that time. It was the fact that I, for the first time, felt like I truly could die and have no remorse. There was nothing for me to live for at that time. It's not like there's a lot for me to live for now, but there's definitely a few more things than at the time, and that's a few more things than at the time. I realized that the light at the end of the tunnel isn't always there, and if there's something blocking it, then the idea can seep in so much clearly. The idea that life isn't worth living, it can hit you so much faster. And I had been depressed before. I had been the worst of people in high school when it came to that shit because I was just sad all the time for no fucking reason. And even then, even as someone who had had bouts of suicidal tendencies for so long, I hadn't realized that death hadn't hit me. Not in an emotional way, at least. It had hit me in a physical way. I had done things to myself, and I had thought things, so it had affected me mentally, but not emotionally. And then I started thinking about it like a normal person, so I was actually using my brain and, logical thinking. And then I realized that the reason death is so hard for people to understand and so hard to confront is because we're not thinking about it in the way that it exists. See, we think of death through the lens of abstract philosophical ideas. Think religion. Think Christianity specifically, because that's what the album Deathconsciousness uses. What is God meant to do? God created Earth, the universe, people, so the book says. But what does he do? Does he orchestrate our lives? Does he tell us what to do? Does he give us vague direction? Does he control aspects of our lives? I genuinely don't know. Like, I've never actually read the Bible in full because I'm an atheist and that sounds like a waste of time. But I ask these questions because I think that has a level of meaning to what I'm trying to discuss. Because the idea that there's a singular being that judges you, your character, your life, and then decides what happens after your life is insane. Obviously, it's an insane concept. I think everyone can agree on a base level, even no matter what religion you are, believing in something that dictates your life is insane. But we exist like this all the time, not only in religion, but actual material existence. People dictate our lives, other people dictate our lives, not only as children, but as adults. You know, as a child, sure, you have parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, and they control your life in the sense that they can tell you what you can and cannot do. But there's also the law, the government, other governments, religious leaders, spiritual leaders, ideological leaders. These people can control your thoughts as well. These people can control what you do and say and think. And they all have a very common thesis on what death is. Death is bad, dying is bad, and you typically want to live as long as you can before that happens. But why? Why do we want to live so long? Why do we avoid death so adamantly? Because death is the most natural part of life. Seriously, besides living, besides eating, besides sleeping, besides shitting, death is probably the fourth most universal aspect of life. And no, I am not putting it below mating, because some of you motherfuckers cannot get bitches. And that is my point on that. But anyways, death is an immutable fact, and yet we treat it like it's the fucking plague. And I think that Deathconsciousness as an album deconstructs it to a degree in which it is no longer that, at least in my mind. Death is no longer this abstract idea to me. It is materialized once more. I think of it in the same way I think of, I don't know, going to get a fucking Frappuccino at Starbucks. I think, yeah, it happens every day, all the time. No one really questions it. But I think that not everyone, and I had to remind myself that not everyone thinks this way. Most people are probably terrified shitless of death. I am too, but I'm only terrified in the sense that it stops my now. That if I died now, I would not like it. But if I died in like 5 decades, I probably wouldn't give a shit. I'd be like, lived a long enough life, did enough, I'm good. And that's the difference, is that acceptance of death in the now is impossible for most people. And it's quite fascinating because most people don't even think about it, let alone thinking about accepting it. And that's completely normal. No one should be thinking about dying all the time, but you shouldn't not think about it either, because if you're not thinking about it, then what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about life? Are you thinking about the things going on in your life? No one's life is that interesting. I'm gonna be quite honest. If you can't think about death for more than 5 minutes, you're probably just not thinking that much, because it's an unmovable object. Trust me, you'll get to a point in your life where it is the sole object in mind, because it is so immutable. Now, I'll be honest, I have another issue. My other issue is having existential panic attacks brought on by this album. I will say it with my chest. This album did, in fact, cause this to happen. But I like the appreciation for death it's given me. And now that sounds like a weird sentence, but I appreciate death in the sense that I appreciate it because it gives us something to look forward to. At the end of the day, even at the shittiest, we all end up in the same place. Some of us get better boxes. Some of us don't get boxes. But we all end up in the same spot. In the ground at some point. Okay, maybe not all of us in the ground. Most of us in the ground. But we all end up dead. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it's not an ideological or philosophical or religious topic. It's one of nature, and it's one of individual interpretation. You can interpret death as religious or philosophical or ideological, but that takes away from the absolute immutable nature of it, because philosophy, ideology, and religion are not immutable. They are things that we could easily do away with if we simply chose to. but we can't do away with death. So don't think of it in those confined boxes. Think of death as something as essential as life. Accept death, welcome it, and try to appreciate life in that context. Don't appreciate life in the sense that God has given it to you and that death will be a transition. Think of it in the sense that you were chosen out of all those thousands of fuckers and that you got to be alive, and that as shitty as it might be, you're gonna end up in the same place as all those thousands of fuckers that didn't make it. So who cares? Who cares how shitty your life is? Who cares what you look like? Who cares what you do? Just live the life you want to live, because only you can give it value. Death can't even do that, because, like I said, death is nature. Nature can't give you meaning. Only you can. And that's what I love about death consciousness, is that it made me realize this. And yeah, sure, existential panic attacks, not a good thing. I should probably fix that. But for the time being, I'm okay with dealing with it because I understand something about myself that I didn't before. I never realized why I was scared of the idea of death, but then it hit me that death doesn't really mean anything. It's given meaning, but its meaning is always bad. Stop thinking about death as a bad thing, and stop thinking about it, and start thinking about it as a normal thing. If you do nothing else after watching this video, just think about death as something normal.